midlife and empty nests are not endings, they are the last moments, helping women step into their second life with clarity, confidence, and purpose. Other than Miss Julie Waas. Welcome, Miss Julie, on Book 101 Review. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you, Daniel, for inviting me on your podcast. I'm happy to be here. So, again, my name is Julie Waas, and I am a coach for midlife women. Aside from that, I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney now for over 39 years. And when my kids left the nest, um, I realized that that was my time to basically, figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And in that time period, I started exercising, ran 2 half marathons and 10Ks. And in 2021, during COVID, I had always been drawing ever since I was a little girl and drawing abstract drawings. And my art teacher, when I was 12, told me I had no talent. So I never took any more art classes after that. And in 2021, while I was working from home, I decided I was going to buy some art pens and art paper and take my little drawings and make them into little pieces of art. And I showed them to my husband, and he said to me, "Why don't you sell them?" Like, I'm not an artist, so why would I sell them? But he finally convinced me to start a website and an Instagram, which I did in October 2021. And in November 2021, I got an email from the Brick Lane Gallery in London inviting me to exhibit in March of 2022. First, I thought it was a joke because how could it possibly be that an art gallery was inviting me to exhibit? But it turned out to be true. And it really started a whole whirlwind for me of being invited to exhibit my art. And I just finished a show in New York. It was actually the fourth time that I've been in that gallery, fifth time in New York. And my art's been exhibited in New York, in London, in Miami, in Venice, in Milan, Madrid, Innsbruck. So it's been an interesting few years. But what it really, highlighted to me is that all these things can be done in the second half of your life, that it's an opportunity for you to really fulfill maybe your dreams, your new purpose, to fill the time that you used to spend taking care of everybody and everything else, and fill that with activities that you want to do. And no matter how big or small, making sure that you maximize the second half of your life. And that's why I became a coach for midlife women. And since have wrote the book, The Midlife Reboot, which contains my strategy for how you can, figure out what you want to do with the second half of your life. And I'm also a speaker, and I have a YouTube channel called Midlife Unleashed with Julie Waas. And I also created a morning journal for folks to use when they get up in the morning. It sort of follows the plan that I follow when I get up early in the morning. So that's me in a nutshell.
And yes, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Miss Julie, here on Book 101 Review, we celebrate you. And today, let's talk about being you. You spent 39 years as a practicing attorney, a professional built on resident risk aversion and winning. Then you become an abstract artist and high performance coach. What did the law teach you that actually prepared you reinvention rather than holding you back?
I think that just having a career as a lawyer, I've had a long career. I'm still practicing. Um, Taught me to use my voice to I don't want to say argue, but to promote things what I think are right and good, and it also showed me as a woman, because I did have I've had an interesting career as a lawyer, that I could do the things I could pursue a career that was important to me and successful, and have it go forward a little different than the standard way that legal careers go. And maybe I should explain that a little. Um, so when I started my career, soon after I became a lawyer. I had my three sons very quickly after that, and my oldest son is autistic. And the early years were very, very challenging with him, and it was very hard to manage a legal career and also raising my three sons, and especially my son Jonathan, who I needed to take to therapy. And so this was back in the late 80s, early 90s, when it was very unusual for there to be part time lawyers. And yet I asked if I could work part time, and I was given the opportunity to do that so that I could also take my son to therapy in the afternoon. And that lasted in my first job. And then ultimately, I was hired by a national law firm in their Miami office. I live in Miami. And I actually became the first part time partner in the history of the firm. So I was always one that, wanted to do things a little differently and do the best I could. And I think that all of that set me up for um, being bold enough to try new things when my kids were no longer there and I didn't need to be taking care of them all the time.
Well said, Miss Julie. You become your art career at the age of 60, and
Yes.
in 2 months, you're exhibiting internationally. That's not a typical timeline. What shifted inside you that may say yes to creativity so decisively?
It's that's an interesting question because, like I said, I'd always been drawing, and honestly, I do remember the day that I was sitting at my desk just like I am today, and said to myself, why don't I buy some art pens and art paper? And I honestly don't know what compelled me to do that. I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to be selling art. I never thought of that until my husband suggested it. I just thought this would be fun to do. And I took the small pieces, and put them in frames. And I never dreamed when I started an Instagram account for my art that anybody would be looking at it, much less art galleries would be looking at it. And so it just proved to me that you just never know. You never know where your story is going to go. And it's never too late to try something new. It's never too late, never. So, I mean, age 60, to pursue something that I never dreamed of, that when I was 20, when I was 10, when I was 20, when I was 30, any of those years, I never would have believed that my art would be exhibited internationally in art galleries. So I think, at the end of the day, it just shows that whatever you want to pursue, and I'm not saying that everybody's going to end up like me, but there's no harm in trying, and there's no harm in pursuing something. After you've lived several decades, we've all failed, we've all picked ourselves up and started again, and we have the benefit in midlife and beyond of having all these decades of experience that serve us really well and make us a little more fearless, because at this point in life, really, what do you have to lose? It's just a time to try new things, to make the most of it. And I always say that one important aspect of it is that your children are watching, and your children want to know that you're okay when they leave. They don't want to have to be worrying about mom. Is she going to be sitting at home crying all the time? Is she going to be very sad because I'm not there? And don't get me wrong, I love my children. I miss my children. I don't get to see them as often anymore as I used to. But again, you need to fill your time. And, a lot of that has to do with my attitude about that was what witnessing my mother suffer terribly when my older sister went to college. And it left an enormous impression on me. And it made me decide, even at that age, when I was a teenager, that I was not going to go to bed for 6 weeks like my mother did when my kids would go to college and leave the house. That I was going to make sure that I maximize the time that I had left.
Congratulations, Miss Julie. You've said you watched your mother struggle deeply with empathy syndrome,
Yes.
and you made a promise to take a different approach. What did you witness in her that you were determined not to repeat?
Well, my mother was a brilliant woman. She was actually a college graduate. She wanted to be a lawyer, but her father wouldn't let her go to law school. And then my father told her that she wasn't allowed to work. And I think she was very frustrated, even though she would never admit it. But I think when she saw my sister go to college and leave the house, and she knew I was going to be going in a couple of years too, that it suddenly hit her that now what does she do? Sitting around, they're not there, and it was very painful to watch and very scary for me because she literally went to bed for 6 weeks as soon as they came home from taking my sister to college. By the next morning, she stayed in bed and didn't get out till 6 weeks later. We finally convinced her to go to the doctor. I thought she was dying because she was complaining of all these vague symptoms, but it turns out there was nothing physically wrong with her. And then
Mhm.
she sunk into a deep depression, what I think was a deep depression. What do I know? I was a teenager, but she didn't get any help. But she did stop talking to me that winter. And that's when I looked at her. I came home from school one day and she was just looking out the window. She wouldn't even say hello. And I made that promise to myself that I would not do the same thing. And years later, when I came home to an empty house after taking my youngest son to college, I remembered that vow I made to myself. And I knew that I couldn't get in bed and go to bed for 6 weeks. That yes, I could be sad. Of course, I could be sad. I mean, like I said, I love my children and I relish every opportunity to spend time with them. But they have their lives too, and that's important. And they also need to know that I hope that they know that, they don't have to worry about me and that I'm not sitting at home waiting for them to call me.
Miss Julie, your book is called The Midlife Reboot. For a
Yes.
woman listening who feels stuck, invisible, or just exhausted, what does a reboot actually require that refresh or reset does not?
Well, I think it's a process. I think first of all, it requires a desire to figure out what am I going to do. And I think most women have that desire, and also it requires a woman not to listen to people saying you're too old, it's too late, all of that. And then the next thing to do is to really sit down and I think journaling, I'm a big fan of journaling and, take stock of your life, reflect, and think about the things that you've enjoyed doing, the things that maybe you don't really like to do anymore, things that maybe you put aside decades ago and, and now you might want to pick it up again. There are so many myths out there about it being too late to start, and people are afraid, like, oh, how can I start exercising again at age 50? Well, that's a perfect time to start, and it's a perfect time to get healthy, or it's a perfect time to take a class of something that you had always thought you might want to try. um, but like I said, I think the first step is to sit down and really, and that's the first part of my book, is reflecting on your life, what lit you up, what lights you up, what drains you, Making a list, journaling about it, thinking about it, all of these things. And then once you figure that part out, then you can start moving forward and figure out, okay, now I'm thinking about what lights me up. Let me think about what I might want to start doing. Um, and trying things out and not being afraid to try, not being afraid to fail, and enjoying the time that you have and enjoying that free time, and not feeling guilty and not apologizing and not asking for permission to spend the time focusing on you.
Well said, Miss Julie. You created the Unstoppable Morning Journal. Why is morning specifically the window you choose, and what happens when a woman misses a morning?
Well, for I don't know how many years now, I get up very early. I get up at like 5:30 in the morning because I like to exercise. I exercise every single day. It's really important to me, and I work out at home because I have a Peloton bike and I do the strength classes and everything at home. But the first thing I do in the morning is I get up and the house is quiet, my husband's asleep, and I go sit in my favorite chair and I close my eyes and I think first about what am I grateful for and who am I grateful for? I think when you start the morning with gratitude and instead of doom scrolling on your phone, and you start thinking about that and thinking about, if you're religious, praying. I do pray in the morning. And then I created this journal because what I also like to do is not only sit there and go through this process mentally and even speak it out loud because nobody's in the room. Um, but it also gives you an opportunity to write down who am I grateful for today? What am I grateful for? They're two different things. You can be grateful for people, and then you can also be grateful for places, events, things like that. And then how do I want to show up today? And make a list of how you want to show up, and make a list of three things that you want to do, and then a space to write your morning affirmations, and then also space to draw or to write freehand, to journal in the morning. And I do it every morning. I created it for me, but I hope it can be used by others too, because I think it's a great practice. It really sets you up, especially if you wake up in the morning and maybe you had a bad day, Lynn, or you had a bad night, you didn't sleep well, or you're preoccupied with thoughts and ruminations about things, or you're just sad. To have this process to go through in the morning, and going back to gratitude, I just think it's so important because I know that for me, I we all have bad days, but when you sit down and you say, okay, what am I grateful for? Who am I grateful for? And then you think about asking them to be watched over and protected, and it's a very life affirming way to start the day, I think, and it works for me, and I really encourage others to do it because we could all doom scroll, and the world is bad enough and crazy enough that if we focus on that, that will, send us down that awful rabbit hole, so to speak. And I'm as guilty of it as the next person. And I try to not do that first thing in the morning so that I can go through this process and then I go and exercise and I start my day. And at least I've started my day with a positive attitude and a grateful heart.
Miss Julie, for a woman who says, I'm not creative or I have no talent, how would you want her to understand about the difference between skill and the impulse to create?
I think everybody has talents. They're just different. Um, you don't have to be, professional at something, and you may discover a talent. You may discover that you're really good at something. You just gave it a try, and like, oh my goodness, I can actually do this. I think the idea is that you just don't know. there are undiscovered talents. I never thought, I would be, like I said, I would be a professional artist, much less writing a morning journal, writing a book, having a YouTube channel. I think, you have to experiment, you have to try different things. And it comes down to realizing when you get to a certain age, do you really care what people think? I mean, you've lived a long life, and it's really not about what everybody else is doing. It's really focusing on what you want to do and trying new things and being fearless and being okay with failing and saying, okay, I tried this, it doesn't work for me. Let's see what else I'm going to try.
Hmm, that's awesome and interesting, Miss Julie. A listener in her late 40s and 50s feels completely stuck and doesn't know what her first step should be. Not the same step, the first. What do you tell her to do tomorrow morning?
I would say to pull out a little notebook and start journaling. Just start writing down, why do you feel stuck. I found journaling to be amazing because, and I would absolutely say you have to do it. You have to write it as opposed to typing it on the computer. There's something about the process of actually handwriting something and just sitting down and just, if you feel stuck, start writing about, why do I feel stuck? You know, think about it. Just freehand, free association, write 2 pages, and the next morning write another 2 pages. And I absolutely can't guarantee, but when you start doing that, it's amazing what comes out of your brain to your hand and what you find from looking inward. And that's why I say reflection is so important, because in order to get unstuck, you sort of do have to figure out why you're stuck. You may not know where you're going, but you may figure out what's keeping you from moving forward. And I think a lot of it could be fear. I think we all experience fear, and fear is, I always talk about like the little major general on the side of your head speaking in your ear, telling you, don't do it. It's that, don't go forward, stay stuck. And they're just trying to keep you safe. And it's like our job to tell that little major general, you got it, I'm going to go forward anyway. But like I said, the journaling, reflecting, figuring out, asking the question, why am I stuck? What is it? And just exploring. And then having the courage to say, I am going to move forward. I'm going to see what I want to do and try some new things.
Hmm, definitely. Yeah. And to wrap up our discussion for today, Miss Julie, if a woman listening is afraid it's too late to start something new, a career, a creative practice, a fitness, a routine, a dream, what do you want her to know about the relationship between age and courage?
It's not too late. It's never too late. In fact, what I would say is that the second half of your life is actually the perfect time to start because you're starting with wisdom and you have the opportunity to have an incredible second half, a healthy second half. It's great for your brain, great for your body to move forward. And it's not too late. It's never too late to get started with anything.
It's never too late, people. So, Miss Julie, can you please invite our listeners to support your book itself?
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what you said.
Can you please invite our listeners to support your book itself?
Oh, yes, absolutely. My book's available. My Midlife Reboot and the Unstoppable Mornings Journal are both available on Amazon. And I would love, and anyone who would like to pick it up, you can also contact me at julie@juliewaas.com if you want to have a chat, and we can set up a time to talk. And I'm here for you. I do coaching as well. So, but I'd love for you to pick up the book, and hopefully it has lots of strategies for you to get started on your own midlife reboot.
Midlife reboot indeed. So, Miss Julie, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been a pleasure.
Monica people, see you soon.